Hey guys, Daniel here, and I'm at the Bayou City Paranormal Symposium, and I'm glad to be here with my friends Ken Gerhard. Ken, good to be here with you.
Always, Daniel.
And
Always
Nick
good to see
Redfern.
Hey, Daniel.
So you guys put together a awesome book that deals with different creatures of Texas, or monsters of Texas rather, that range from Bigfoot to Chupacabra to all these different mystery creatures that sometimes we don't hear as much about. And so I thought it would be great to have you guys share a little bit about the process of coming together and looking at these different cases, the reports that you might get from all across the state, and then putting them together in this awesome book. So let's start with you, Ken.
Well, I remember that around the time period when we started talking about this book, there were a series of similar books that were coming out, monsters of different states, Michigan,
That's right.
and West Virginia, whatever. And, Nick and I just kind of decided, well, maybe we should pop out a Monsters of Texas before someone else comes up with the idea. And, obviously he's in Dallas, Arlington. I was in San Antonio, so we kind of had the state covered. And Nick is obviously the more experienced writer, so he had kind of a strategy in terms of, okay, well, these are a few topics that I think you can cover, and I think I've got these topics covered, and so we just kind of delineated those. And we had already done a Lake Worth, that was our first collaboration, right?
Yep.
As far as we had done the Lake Worth monster investigation back in like 2005 or something like that. And so, so that was kind of the start of it, unless he's got more to add to that.
Sure. Well, I'll just say really quickly. So, in a lot of other states, you might have a few local legends of monsters or creatures or sightings, but when it comes to Texas, it's such a large area and different environments, from the cities, of course, but the forests, the mountains, the desert, the ocean. So for both of you guys to be able to cover all these different things, it's like you have to find ways to get to these different areas sometimes, or just, if it's convenient, trade off back and forth. So Nick, what was it like to be able to see some of these cases in different areas, and then start to kind of work on how practical it is to follow up with some reports and things?
Well, yeah, I think for the most part we tried to cover just about every kind of cryptid in Texas, and but the state is huge.
Sure.
But I think we made a good job of it, and what I liked was that there were certain chapters and subjects that Ken was really knowledgeable on, and then there are other ones like the Wolfman stories, werewolf stories, which I was, and then like Ken had got a ton of material on Bigfoot in Texas, and so we were able to, I guess to a significant degree, we're able to write our own separate chapters, but they sort of seamlessly went together in sort of a study of the creatures overall. It wasn't and it didn't look like one was actually written by one person, one by another. Our writing styles on those books were pretty much very similar. So you could read each one and not think, wow, this one's totally different to the previous chapter. So I think it came together well. And we both had sort of our areas of expertise, and in between that we shared information, tossed the Word document back and forwards, and let's add this and I've just found this old story I forgot about, that kind of thing,
Yeah. So when you're kind of getting in the collaboration mode and seeing how you might, like I said, might be more familiar with different cases here and there. You mentioned throughout a few others like Bigfoot, and you have the werewolves and things like that, and there are plenty that a lot of people might not know a lot about. So let's start with some of the more big icons of the field of cryptozoology, like Bigfoot. A lot of people even there don't know that here in Texas we have reports of Bigfoot. So what was it like uncovering some of these different cases of Bigfoot specifically?
Well, Texas, as you said, a lot of people associate Bigfoot typically with the Pacific Northwest. So in terms of like statewide rankings, it goes Washington, California, Oregon are the big three, and then Florida, where you have the skunk ape, I think is fourth, and then Ohio, interestingly enough. And then I think Texas is either 6th or 7th. Michigan and Illinois are in this one. Texas is essentially in the top 7 states. Now, it is, as he mentioned, it's a vast state. But, if you chart all the sightings out on a map, the vast majority of those are east of I-45 corridor in the big thicket and kind of going up to the eastern part of the state. So
big forested areas.
Yeah, big forest. People think of Texas as kind of this big, wide open, lots of ranches and, deserts and cactus and tumbleweeds. But if you go to East Texas, it's like really, thick, dense, brushy areas. And of course, you have right across the borders from Texas, you have Louisiana, Arkansas, where you have the Fouke Monster, Oklahoma. There's a lot of, so it seems like there's a lot of concentration of sightings in those areas, and I guess we did cover those, and to some extent we covered some of the. Now Nick wrote about the wild man of the Navidad, which of course is the oldest story of a Bigfoot type creature in Texas. So we have a lot of history here as well.
Yeah, and on that note, you also have not just the wild man, you have the wild woman as well. So this is kind of like a interesting dynamic.
Well, yeah, the wild man of the Navidad story is a fascinating old tale, and in some respects, why I find it intriguing is because you can apply it to Bigfoot, but there's some characteristics that are almost more like a wild, primitive person, or two people, a male and female. And there's one story about it sort of brandishing a club, and also sort of wildly racing across the plains on a horse,
Yeah, wow.
with the club, which I'm sure is a little bit exaggerated,
Yeah.
But in saying that, it is a genuinely weird story because, you kind of think, okay, it could be Bigfoot because Bigfoot's seen elsewhere, but could there be like an isolated pocket of like feral, primitive humans somewhere in Texas, which takes it down a different path, very controversial, but it's cryptozoology, it's controversial,
Sure, yeah, well, when you hear some of these stories, especially the historic ones, it can be tough to go down and, much less not only see records and newspapers and clippings and things, but, there's no one alive left to really talk to in some cases, but one thing we have happen is maybe certain stories or elements of the stories are embellished or changed down the line, so then you end up with different things happening which sound really bizarre, and maybe not that it's impossible, but almost way too hard to believe. So when it comes to something like the werewolf stories, that sounds to most people like that's just the stuff of fairy tale and movies and things. So these are actual cases like where we might have something happening here in the States. So what was it like uncovering files or uncovering stories on the werewolf?
Well, yeah, that was a weird one because, people think of werewolf, they think of full moon, silver bullets, and people bursting out their clothes like the Incredible Hulk, that kind of thing, But the reality is, the reports are very similar to the Dogman phenomenon today. And for the most part, people don't talk about transformations and metamorphosis and lycanthropy.
Yeah.
They talk about a creature that looks like a large wolf that has the ability to stand on its hind legs and forelimbs. Now, that's sort of stretching credulity, if you like, but on the other hand, that's what people are talking about. All we can kind of do is sort of document those cases, and there's no doubt, that's sort of the fringiest end of the fringe when you start talking about bipedal wolves. But if you're going to do a full study of monsters in Texas, whether you think the stories are garbage, real, misidentification, it would be wrong not to include them and comment, because it is a legitimate part of the phenomenon, even though it's one of the wildest parts of it.
Absolutely, and you hit a really good note there when we were speaking on this a little bit earlier. When you're dealing with certain encounters, it might not necessarily be a different strange creature, but a misidentified normal creature, something that's already familiar or conventionally accepted by science and everything, but something has happened to it to distinguish it from being or appearing normal. So a good example might be another one you guys cover, which is the Chupacabra. So when we're dealing with the original Chupacabra and then the Texas version, there's some distinct characteristics. So what was it like looking at the difference between maybe the original stories of the El Chupacabras, and then you have here just the Texas Chupacabra? What was that like?
Well, of course, Nick has investigated on the island of Puerto Rico. He's done multiple expeditions out there to look for the original Chupacabra that people heard about starting in 1995, which is kind of this kangaroo-shaped bipedal creature with, reptilian features, big eyes, a forked tongue, and these spikes mohawk going down its back. And then all of a sudden in 2004, you have these kind of weird, hairless, dog-like animals popping up in Texas, starting with the Elmendorf beast, which was shot just outside of San Antonio in 2004. And the name Chupacabra also came out. Now, people always ask me about that. Well, how come there are all these different creatures being called Chupacabras? Well, it really is just a case of one name being used liberally, to describe a lot of different things. The commonality is that at least two ranchers, Devin McAnally and Phyllis Canyon, both claimed that these dog-like creatures were, in fact, killing their chickens and drinking the blood and not eating the flesh. So you already have this kind of preconceived notion of a vampire-like predation, where something, that is unusual, right? The only animal that's adapted and evolved to drink blood, the only higher vertebrate, is the vampire bat. So that's where the name Chupacabra comes from. It's a behavior pattern. Do these things drink blood, right? Chupacabra, bloodsucker. But the animals in Texas are weird, but they've also been DNA tested and examined and thoroughly examined. So we know that definitively they are either coyotes or hybrids with coyotes and wolves or domestic feral dogs. But they look really weird. I mean, they don't have any hair. They have kind of a bluish gray, kind of a tough elephant-like hide skin. They have really long dentition or weird teeth. Some of them, their limbs are different lengths. They have, one of them at least has these nodules on its backside, which are really weird. So even though people have been very dismissive and said, well, they have a disease called mange, which is a parasite that gets in the skin and they scratch out their fur. But as Nick has pointed out, a lot of these animals, they don't have scabs or scratch marks or anything like that. The skin is very uniform and kind of clean looking. So I think there is a bona fide mystery there in terms of why there are so many of these animals in Texas, why they look so weird, why they have these physical abnormalities. But I think it's really the media that has seized on the name Chupacabra and has really kind of built it into maybe a phenomenon that is maybe higher than the animal deserves. So
Sure. So it looks like some of these cases might just be a malformed regular canine,
a diseased or mutated canine that's really weird and acts and looks weird, but it's certainly different from the animals that have been reported in Puerto Rico and Chile and Nicaragua and some of these other countries.
That's an interesting distinction to be able to have there. So we've talked a little bit about Bigfoot and the werewolves and the Chupacabra. Let's jump over to some of the reptiles, the reptilian types of creatures that might have been seen or sighted throughout the state.
Well, you did most of that, didn't you?
Well, I think we kind of split those up.
Did we?
I mean, there's not a lot. There's there's the mountain boomer, which is kind of like described like a small velociraptor type of dinosaur, or perhaps a T-Rex type of dinosaur that's been reported from Big Bend and recently from other parts of South Texas. And then there's a few like lizard man kind of sightings, which are kind of the weird, scaly reptilian humanoids. I think we had a couple, just a couple of accounts of those that kind of popped up. Interestingly enough, more have surfaced recently. Something called the Teague lizard man that I didn't find out until after we wrote the book. It was reported up near kind of south of Dallas in a place called Teague, Texas. But a lot of these stories are obviously very ambiguous, and it's kind of hard to nail down the real facts of the case typically. So they're really just fanciful stories. And I mean, let's face it, Texas is all about tall tales. So I mean, that's definitely a factor in our book, I think.
Yeah, and I think we kind of captured that, like the lure of the imagination and intrigue and the magical nature of this. When I say magical, I don't mean the stories are literally magical, but I mean they capture what it means to sort of have a definitive piece of folklore that may actually be real. You know what I mean? And we didn't, we tried to write it in like an adventurous, intrigue-filled fashion. There's nothing worse than writing a book and John Smith saw Bigfoot it was large and brown, it ran off. You know,
Yeah.
that just doesn't work. So we wanted to write the book, you know, in that kind of way where it would captivate the readers and they would feel they were in on the story, you know. And
Yeah, I think it does a great job of showing how, you know, here in Texas we don't just, it's not like one dimensional. We have so many of these variety of things. One that's a little bit different is we don't really seem to have, we have a lot of lakes. Most of them are man-made, even though we are part, you know, right here on the Gulf with the ocean and all this. There's not a lot of accounts of aquatic type cryptids.
Not messy type
No.
of lake monsters. No.
there's all one eye,
There's a one eye, yeah.
Lake Granbury.
Lake Granbury, and then there's lots of those huge catfish stories.
No.
Yeah,
You know,
so
in the
this,
reservoirs, these monstrous man-eating catfish stories. So
those might kind
Alligator
of,
gar.
alligator gar,
Yeah,
yeah.
some big ones.
so you have a lot of these, when it comes to the watery type creatures, they're more just enlarged regular creatures again, rather than something that's completely different. Not all of them, you know, apparently we have like the one eye of Granbury, some things like that, but for the most part it seems like there's just, again, more legends of these very large fish that are caught and
Big
done
fish
with-
stories.
Yeah, big
really,
fish stories.
You know, but and of course, you know, the two of the biggest cryptids that we wrote about in the book is Nick did a chapter on the Lake Worth monster, the Goatman,
Goatman,
which is a pretty big, you know, deal up there, and then you know, iconic in terms of Bigfoot history because you know, you had like the famous, you know, tire throwing incident, which apparently was witnessed by 30 or 40 people. So that's a pretty big deal if that happened. And then I did a chapter on the Big Bird, which, you know, is a you know, a fairly well-known cryptid mostly from South Texas, which is basically, some people describe it as like a big feathered vulture-looking bird, and other people say it's kind of prehistoric and pterodactyl. So those are kind of like the big name cryptids I think that Texas is known for. So we at least checked all those boxes.
Yeah, so you've got the avian with the big bird, I mean, if you want to say mammalian with Bigfoot or the Chupacabra, plenty of other ones like that, and of course the reptilian one with the boomers, and just a lot of different variety of these different types of creatures. And so there's environments here that seem to be able to suit many different types of different, you know, regular creatures, of course, but if we have something that's different, there's a large enough space that maybe they're in these remote areas and have been around for a very long time, and we're still, like you just said, we're finding out about more every day, and I think it's great to be able to have you guys looking into these cases, following up the field research, and you know, I think it's something that if we don't go, we won't know, and so I think it's really important to consider that, you know, there's still things out there to be discovered, and if we don't have people like what you guys are doing to really look into these cases, follow up with the reports, we may never find some of the greatest discoveries. And you have to consider that a lot of the people out there might never share about their encounter because they don't feel like there's a supportive outlet for them to do that, or they'll be ridiculed. So
That's always a big factor.
it's a real challenge, but I think with the work you guys are doing, it helps to bring out. So to follow up with after the book had come out, what was it like, you know, after that process? Did you guys receive like an influx of reports from different things because they saw that you were writing more about these creatures?
I think we got reports, didn't we? But I mean, I wouldn't say, you know, it was like a gigantic flood. But I mean, you know, got some interesting ones. I mean, some of the stuff I enjoyed researching and writing for the book were like the old newspaper stories, you know, where like somebody was found and they got like a 3-foot long worm in their stomach, and you know, and things like that, like really bizarre stories.
Yeah.
Nick scoured a lot of old archives to do a lot of history in Texas, and he found a lot of these weird stories of like he said, like a half man, half pig being born
that's
in
right,
Galveston. You know, stuff like that.
Well,
Just like weird old stories.
I mean,
like that.
unfortunately, they probably were tragic cases of malformed babies, you know.
Yeah.
Sure.
But
So
he got embroidered into something bigger.
yeah, that kind of opens up a different direction of some of the encounters or findings that don't seem to fall into the like classic categories of species. So what were some of the more odd findings, like the ones you just mentioned, or not necessarily like you could say, well, this is a mammal, or that's just this or that? It obviously seems like it's way out of the scope of anything that's normal. So what were some of the ones that are a bit more on the unusual side?
Well,
Even though we're already on really unusual things, what would you say about
well,
that?
I would actually I quite like the Lake Granbury story of Old One Eye, which is like, although, you know, Ken's talked about giant catfish and, you know, alligator gar, but if the story's true, like old One Eye, that would be like a definitive lake monster. That wouldn't be like an alligator gar or whatever. So, but I mean, do I really believe that story? I mean, it's a good story. You know?
Yeah.
And Nick had a good one. He had been approached at a conference, and he heard a story of these two old solitary ladies in West Texas that
Oh yeah.
that when they were younger, they had seen these giant gargoyle man-like creatures coming out of a cellar. You know,
Yeah,
it's like,
that was,
you know, just weird stuff like that.
That
where it's
was
just like,
that was Littlefield, Texas.
yeah, Littlefield
in the
you know.
1940s, and they were like something out the Jeepers Creepers movie, kind of like hopping out the cellar late at night or whatever, and coming out the ground, and
Yeah,
you know.
and I found one on a database from another research group of a guy that claims he saw like this giant turtle crossing the road that was like as big as this table. You know, it's things like that are just kind of like one-off, just weird stories that you can't really prove or disprove, but they're out there. You know.
What I do wish we did find, and I don't think we did, but you'll correct me if we're wrong. Well, really like the stories of like the giant spiders. You know, I mean, I don't think we've got any from Texas, but some of those stories, you know, in the deep south, like Louisiana, you know, people say that they've seen like a giant spider that's like 3 foot across or something.
As big as a wash tub.
Wash tub.
Yeah, you get those stories. And so, you know, those are, as a researcher, those are fun. I think they stimulate you because they're different, you know. As fascinating as things like Bigfoot are and, you know, different lake monsters, there seems to be, they're fairly consistent patterns within a lot of those cryptids or phenomena, but then when you get those kind of one-off stories that are just like way out of left field, like you know, like giant spiders, turtles, and things like that, and you're just like, well, you know, where the heck does that stuff
Well,
come
like the Houston
from?
Batman, I mean, Ken did all that. I mean, that's like a really cool, strange story. You
It's
know,
not like
that's,
an ordinary bird or something.
Yeah, that's like Jeepers Creepers or something. You know, it comes out the sky and perches on a branch or something at 3 a.m. or whatever.
But he's wearing a uniform. He's got like a helmet and boots, and he's you know, like he's a paratrooper or something. But he's glowing, and
So sometimes these cases kind of widen the breadth of what cryptozoology consists of, because it seems like a lot of classical cryptozoology deals with, you know, just almost variations of known species or something that's different, or maybe prehistoric. But when you have some of these really weird, maybe humanoid type findings, it almost changes the scope of what has to be researched. So from that, you know, it seems like a lot of other possibilities are out there. And so, you know, what are some of the things that you guys have gone to after this work that I guess you could say this was influential in some of your later research? What are some of the areas that you guys really went to after putting this one together?
that's a good question. Where did this
Well, you
springboard?
did quite a bit on. I mean, had we not written the book, you probably wouldn't have done all that research on the Houston Batman and the latter-day reports, would you? I guess maybe.
The flying humanoids?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think, like I said, there's the recent lizard man sightings that I investigated. I had never heard of a lizard man. You know, people have heard of a lot of people have heard of the lizard man from South Carolina, the escape horse swamp creature.
The donkey lady.
Donkey lady. You know, a lot of these weird kind of legends of weird creatures. Like Texas just has so much, and we should. I mean, we're the second biggest state. It's a vast state with a lot of, as you said, a lot of different types of habitats, and you know, quite frankly, a lot of storytellers. You know, so it's like the bigger the state and the more storytellers you have. I mean, we even worked the jackalope in there just as kind of a tongue-in-cheek type thing. But the jackalope is kind of like the poster child for Texas legendary beasts.
It's funny to see it at, like, let's say maybe restaurants that have a bunch of, you know, decorations, things. A lot of places will have a jackalope. You never see a place with a Chupacabra or like a Bigfoot, you know, hanging up or something. So the jackalope has caught on as this, and you know,
and that was not a springboard. We didn't write any jackalope for that, by the way. So. Black Panthers.
Oh, that's right.
They kind of just similar to England, where they have the Beast of Exmoor and Bobby Moore and all that kind of stuff. We have in Texas. We have a number of those sightings of big black mystery cats, and you know, what's interesting to me is that a lot of people don't realize how weird that is, because when we mention that a lot of times, people, oh yeah, I've seen a black panther. I was like it's, just like any other, like a deer or something. You'd say, oh yeah, we saw it. It's like, no, you shouldn't be seeing black panthers in Texas. That's absolutely should not be here. So maybe not for us, but there's a guy named Michael Mays that recently wrote a book about black panthers in Texas, and perhaps he hopefully he was inspired by some of our stories and stuff.
Yeah,
accounts,
it makes you wonder if some of the encounters are from exotic pets that have to be released, or if someone's just let them out in the wild, or if they're somehow maybe not necessarily native. They could be, or they've migrated from different places, and so kind of it makes you wonder what percentage of the findings are releases or have been traveling for a long area that does not seem like they should be in that region, or something like you're saying with these cats. So there's a lot of mystery all across the board, whether it's variations of known species, or all the way to the other side where it's completely different.
I mean you can sort of split it into different sections. Like you said, you've got animals that may have escaped, but regular animals but seen where they shouldn't be seen. Then you've got creatures that we believe are out there because of evidence, like Bigfoot, but they're not escapees. They're an unknown animal. And then at the far end, you've got the ones that seem to have the paranormal overtones, like the Houston Batman and some of these, the Goatman and things like that. But then again, that one could go either way, because some people think it was, a Bigfoot. But what I like about that story though is the photograph by Alan Plaster.
Yeah.
Of
the big white thing.
Big white cotton ball, Bigfoot kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you've got those delineated categories: known animal in the wrong place, unknown animal, and kind of one of John Keel's quote things. Something that's bizarre.
You brought up a good point earlier, though, because the field of cryptozoology really has evolved and continues to evolve. It was started in the 1950s by, fairly reputable scientists like Bernard Heuvelmans and Ivan Sanderson, who had really impressive credentials as zoologists. But I think when we got to the weird period of the 1970s, and you had guys like John Keel and the early Lauren Coleman books and stuff, they started to delve more into these kind of weird Mothman, Loveland frog type creatures. And so, the field has really expanded to incorporate some of these almost slightly more paranormal types of creatures and stuff. And for better or for worse, because a lot of, the old school cryptozoologists kind of cringe, at that. But, you can't rule out the fact that there are real unknown animals involved. There are theories that Mothman might be a giant owl or a giant bird. There are theories that Goatman might be a Bigfoot or a relic hominid. So it's all kind of, it's all a lot of gray area.
Yeah. So as much rhetoric as we have, or speculation, see if I can pause there for a moment. We'll wrap it up with this part. I don't know where that's coming from.
Scratching there.
Yeah, they're after us. They're on us. Yeah. Okay. All right. So as much speculation as we have all across, with all of the different theories of what these could be, and you made a good point there, saying some of the classical points of view don't really try to encompass some of the more outlandish, almost spectral and metaphysical qualities. But you have to go with what's experienced out in the field. If someone sees a Houston Batman, they don't have to make up a story about it for it to be bizarre. They experience something that is already bizarre, and so right there, you can't filter that case out of something, I think, that is important to consider and to look into. But then you have the side of where people say, well, maybe I think Bigfoot can do these things or do that. Did they ever actually experience or see that? Probably not. But they like to, speculate that there are these other, paranormal qualities that some of these creatures might possess. Even though, some of the people who share these types of claims might have zero experience in the field or even have an encounter or sighting. It's just going based off of like a feeling or maybe even want for these creatures to be beyond their already bizarre qualities. And so do you think that with some of the stories that come out, and of course there are lots of weird videos that you see online, do you think this is kind of muddied up the waters of cryptozoology, or is it something that we need to try to look into, or how do we process a lot of this material and information?
Well, I mean, I'm quite interested in some of these weirder aspects of Bigfoot, and I've written about that. But in saying that, even I have to admit that the fringe cases are actually an extremely small percentage of the overall percentage. But I think what sometimes happens is that the weirder ones kind of become sensationalized and they kind of go down in history a little bit. I mean, like, for example, the 1973 wave in Pennsylvania. Now, had there not been the really weird aspects to some of those cases, it probably would have just been remembered as a Bigfoot flap, But because there are these allegedly weird aspects to it, strange lights in the sky and all sort of stuff's going on.
Bigfoot carrying a glowing orb
That's
through the
right,
woods.
yeah. If it hadn't been for that, it probably would have, I wouldn't say been forgotten, but it wouldn't have got the mystique that it does now.
Yeah.
So I have to say that even though I've researched and looked into a lot of these fringe tales, even I have to admit it's nowhere near the vast majority. In fact, it's not even, in the middle. It's way down.
Yeah, there are 5,000 accounts and it's this many.
But I guess what I would say is there shouldn't really be any if it's just, an unknown animal. But then again, I mean, who knows what... I don't know. All I can say is there is a small percentage of people who claim to have really weird experiences with Bigfoot. All we can do is kind of collect the data, analyse it, and to the best of our ability, put the data out and answers if we can find them. That's the best we can do until, we hopefully catch one, tag it, DNA it, and let it go.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really great way to wrap it up and see how, all the work that's been done by you guys, both collectively and then independently, has reached a lot of people and allowed them to find a sense of comfort in knowing that, okay, there are cases out there, there are other experiences that people are having that might be similar to theirs. So what would you say as a send-off for people who have had a encounter or that might end up having one in their life that want to be able to be more open and sharing or maybe report it somehow?
Well, contact me or Nick, because, we're definitely interested. I'm always interested in hearing anything anyone has to say unless it just gets so weird from the get-go. But that's pretty rare. We're open-minded people, but we certainly have access to a lot of material and sometimes we can connect the dots for people. A lot of eyewitnesses that have had remarkable experiences are looking for some form of closure, and it's almost therapeutic for them to talk to someone like Nick or I that can assure them, hey, you know what, you're not going to believe I saw this thing, and then something clicks in my head and goes, you know what? That sounds similar to another account that I, heard of over here. And, maybe we can provide that little modicum of closure by just providing them with a similar experience that someone else had, or, connecting the dot in some way that, giving them some type of explanation, maybe not a definitive explanation, but at least something that might help them sleep a little bit better at night. What do you think, Nick?
No, I agree. I think, if, for me, it's not enough just to write the book. You want to know that people have got something from it, whether it's answered one of their questions or they feel comfortable by the fact that, wow, that person saw exactly what I saw, so I wasn't crazy, or mistaken. So, if we can help people or inform, entertain them, a bit of everything, and it adds to our understanding of cryptozoology, that's a good thing. And I think I think we did a pretty good job, a very good job of covering Texas, and maybe as the cryptids grow, in Texas, maybe 20 years from now we'll be doing more monsters of Texas.
Part
even
two.
more monsters of
Part
Texas.
two.
Bigger and better. Yeah, great. So on that note, where can people go to find out about your work? We'll start with you, Ken.
KenGerhard.com or Ken Gerhard Cryptozoologist on Facebook.
Awesome. And you, Nick?
Just type in Nick Redfern World of Whatever, and that'll take you right to my blog.
Great. All right, guys, be sure to check this book out and all the others that these two have done. Really fascinating material. Well, Ken, glad to be here with you both, and Nick as well.
Always a pleasure, Daniel. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Daniel.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
If you liked this video, be sure to check out our other content and get connected on our page and social media sites. Every day, new discoveries are being made all across the world and beyond, So let's work together to find out what's next. And remember, we won't know if we don't go. I'll see you in the vortex.